1. When I started college, my university gave me a list of writing classes that were required for freshmen. I didn't get my first choice, but I was intrigued when I got placed in a writing class based on human and civil rights. It was a great class, and I learned a lot and met Chloe, a girl I now consider to be my soul sister. My professor didn't seem too odd at first. He kind of had that hippie vibe to him, and was very passionate about human and civil rights. He was also head of the political science department at the university. When we got together, he boasted about how excited he was to have a class that consisted of all women. I didn't find it inherently off-putting. I thought it was cool that he was excited. But my friend and I later analyzed a lot of the things he said and did in a different way. As time went on, I got closer to Chloe. Her and I would get coffee and discuss the reading material frequently, which eventually branched out to partying and hanging out as well. She used to joke that our professor liked us the most because we were the loudmouths of the class, in the sense that we were always the ones talking during discussions. That, combined with him praising our 100% female class, were not huge red flags for me at the time. The largest event that kind of bothers me now is the trip up to his cabin in the mountains. He had asked us to accompany him as a class to his cabin, almost an hour and a half away from the university in the mountains. We thought it was a bit odd, some of us at least. He brought food up, and I cooked us a large lunch, and it actually was kind of nice to just have a candid conversation with the girls, and my professor brought his wife, so it didn't seem that weird. However, he remained kind of touchy with us. Nothing major, just resting hands on our shoulders while talking to us or trying to get by us. I ended the semester and left that university after finals. I realized that my university didn't have the program I wanted, so I transferred my credits and started going to another school. My friend was dismayed, but we still hung out and did our work together, and she even took another class with him. She said she took him on as an academic professor and worked more closely with him. Again, no immediate red flags from her. That was until she texted me one day asking if I'd heard the news about him. Since I didn't go there anymore, I was amazingly unaware. Our professor had been forced to resign, and it was in the local news as the university was getting ripped to shreds for handling the situation so poorly. Apparently there was a convention or event, and the school's political science department went. The president was a female, and I guess he asked her to meet him at his hotel room to discuss the next day's itinerary. When she showed up, he apparently was not fully dressed, and invited her in to wait while he finished getting ready for dinner. She hesitantly agreed, and as he dressed, he apparently told her that he loved her in the same way he loved his wife, and wanted to be with them both since she was his soulmate. I'm not sure if his wife was in on it or not, but the president immediately reported the incident. Unfortunately, the university offered her a sabbatical, basically asking her to leave the university. Apparently, the professor didn't even deny his behavior in a hearing with university officials. My friend and I got together, and suddenly all of his private meetings with her and I, inviting a group of girls to his cabin in the mountains, seemed a bit off-putting. I've always found myself to be a very paranoid person, and as I got older I tried to shed those thinking habits. But now, I wish I'd paid more attention and been able to intervene and say something before this poor girl was essentially booted out of school in order to help protect his reputation. 2. Growing up, every summer in July or August, my family would get together and camp out for 2 weeks at White Lake State Park in Tamworth, New Hampshire. Some of my best childhood memories were made there. Rollerblading, Nerf gun wars, flashlight tag, and water balloon fights with my cousins and neighboring kids in the campground. When I was around my late teen years, my family stopped gathering together to camp out after my grandmother passed away. One of the last years I was there, this one particular memory has stuck with me. A little over 10 years ago, I was 16 years old. It was around 10 p.m. at night when I noticed I had a missed call on my cheapy little track phone. My family was sitting around the campfire, cooking s'mores and sharing some laughs, so I decided to go off for some privacy to return the call. I took a long, narrow trail that winds in between other campsites, that at the end leads up to the bathroom. I wasn't going up to the bathroom, I just wanted to find an empty campsite and sit at a picnic table to make my call. There was plenty of those, since this whole side of the campground where I was heading was vacant. There were no other campers nearby in that area. It was quiet and dark. So I chose a campsite. I sat down at the table. The lights from the distant bathroom from up on top of the hill behind me were illuminating my surroundings just a little bit. I called my friend and was carrying on a conversation for around 20 minutes. As I'm sitting there staring straight ahead, I see a silhouette coming down the road in front of me. The figure is coming towards my direction, where all these empty campsites are. I could see it was a person. It's not that unusual to see people strolling through the campground for a night walk. The people I usually see have flashlights, though. This person did not. I wasn't creeped out at this point, no reason to be. I was just watching curiously. As the person got closer, I could see a better outline, and that it was a man I was looking at. I also noticed his pace slowed down. I kept my eyes fixated on him as I continued conversing on my cell phone. A minute or two passes, and now he stopped moving. He's just standing there in the road looking straight into the campsite where I'm at. I don't know if he knew I could see him. He was staring at me, and I was staring right back at him. He was a little heavy-set and tall. I could also make out that he was wearing a light jacket. I couldn't see much for facial features, but I would guess I was staring at a man in his 30s or 40s. Alarm bells were going off in my head now. My mind had turned to mush at this point. I'm frozen. I was no longer listening to what my friend was saying on the phone. I was in a stare-off with this guy. Then he started to move again. He was tiptoeing towards me very carefully, like he didn't want to make a noise. He put one foot in front of the other, leaned forward in a slight hunch form. It looked like he was about to charge towards me. In that moment, I snapped out of that mind-mushy frozen state, and leaped off the picnic table and started running through the campsite back towards the trail. Thud, thud, thud. I could hear him trampling behind me, leaves scuffling heavy yet fast footsteps. Footsteps were getting louder and closer. I made it back to that narrow trail. Once he got close to where I was, I heard the sound of twigs snapping and a noise that came from the man, which I can imagine maybe he tripped or almost tripped, or maybe got face-slapped by a tree branch. Most likely he wasn't familiar with the trail like I was. Whatever the reason was, it caused him to stop chasing after me. I didn't stop to look back. I just kept running, running, and running until I made it back to my family's campsite. When I got back, they were still sharing laughs and smiles by the campfire. I broke down crying, and I was trembling. I explained what had just happened. My aunt spoke up and said, "Oh geez, he probably thought he knew you and was coming up to give you a good scare as a joke." She dismissed me. My cousin chimed in and said, "Yeah, he probably stopped running after he realized that he didn't actually know you. He probably feels dumb now." They all chuckle about it and change the subject. I think I was dismissed because no one wanted the good vibes of the night to be ruined, and the fact that I'm just a socially anxious person in general. I'm very cautious and shy. For that time being, I let them convince me I was just overreacting and overthinking. But here I am years later, looking back and shaking my head over this. I wish I was taken seriously, but other than that one thing happening, it was still a great trip. It was time well spent with family. My experience makes me think twice about going for a walk by myself anywhere. I carry pepper spray and a mini keychain alarm on me now. So, Mr. Campground Chaser, let's not meet again. Edit. My speculation was the man may not have been a camper there. It would be easy for anyone to sneak in the campground from the boat launch area. 3. Truth is stranger than fiction, especially in the backwoods of Arkansas. Now, this one is a little bit funnier than most stories on here when I look back on it, but it was terrifying the night it happened. I'm gonna set the stage a bit. It was a late April night. It had been pouring rain all day. I had a track meet that afternoon, and my parents took me home and dumped me to go over the state line to the liquor store and have an anniversary dinner. We live in a dry county. They had originally planned on going out of town for the entire weekend, but I guess Jesus told them not to, and for that I am grateful, because things could have turned out very differently. One of the local meth heads, Ray, had been doing some work around our house, power washing the upstairs windows, trimming trees, etc. He was relatively harmless, but he had started stealing our chainsaws and stuff, saying he was going to fix them, but then going around trimming trees for other folks and charging them for it. At the time we didn't know this, but we only found out later because he went to my granny's house to do some work, and she recognized our implements. I didn't really like Ray. I had never formally met him, but he had accidentally come into my bedroom one morning while I was asleep, looking for the upstairs balcony door. He coughed and hacked a lot, and I just generally got bad vibes from him. He let our power washer fall off the second story of the house, and he'd been getting back into the meth again, so my dad was getting tired of him. But my dad, being a good man, he let Ray go to the upper end of our ranch to collect some scrap metal from a fallen down barn. Ray needed the money and we needed the mess to be cleaned up. My parents let me know he'd be coming by that night, but I didn't think anything of it, because the metal wasn't anywhere near the house, and I'd never even know he was there. So I was minding my own business, playing my favorite songs and being generally hyped up, because I was home alone, and I had contributed to my school winning the district track meet that day. I was completely unaware of what was going on outside, because why would I be? No one was going to drive up or anything. This is sort of a key point. I was completely oblivious to what was going on outside. So you can understand better, we have two houses, the main house and the guest house. The guest house is a home that's mostly a garage with the classic Mercedes in it. It sits about 150 yards behind the main house. It's where our farm trucks and all the farm tools are. On this particular night, however, our tractor was parked in the driveway beside the main house. One of the rear tires was flat. It couldn't be driven, and Dad hadn't gotten around to patching it up yet. It was completely dark already. It was overcast, so I figure 8:30 or 9 at night. I was messing around in my room when I feel off all of a sudden. I've always had gut feelings that never steer me wrong, but I just brushed this one off as me coming off the high of being 14 and home alone. From my room I couldn't see the guest house, and none of the floodlights were on, so it was pitch black outside. I couldn't stop feeling weird and being drawn to my older sister's old room. She'd moved out a while back for college, which overlooked the backyard and the guest house. I went into her room, and my blood ran cold and my brain couldn't even process what I saw. All the lights in and outside the guest house were on, and the tractor was in the yard in front of the house, with its arms on the front moving up and down wildly, while it was being driven backwards a few feet, and then forwards a few feet. I've always been deathly afraid of vehicles developing minds of their own and becoming destructive. That fear stems from watching an episode of Goosebumps where the family tractor drives through the trailer house and kills the family. Although if memory serves me right, it was a vengeful scarecrow at the helm. I remember so vividly thinking all I could figure was that this tractor had become sentient, and was about to drive through the guest house, and I had to run down there and stop it. I had reason to think that because there were no vehicles besides our own down there, so obviously no one was in the tractor. Plus, that Goosebumps episode distinctively came to mind. I ran downstairs and just stared at it, trying to figure out how I was going to get down there and jump in it, before it ruined our possessions and the chicken coop. So in my blind panic I called my parents. I knew my dad could fix it even though he was 2 hours away, and couldn't get to the house before the tractor leveled the house and killed me and our chickens. I told him what was going on. He instantly knew it was Ray. I had already locked the doors and he told me to find a good vantage point and stay still. He said he'd already told Ray that we were out of town for the weekend and our security system was armed. We didn't have a security system to prevent something like this from happening. I didn't think Ray was going to be dumb enough to try to come in the main house. But when someone's on a particularly rough meth bender, you can say with 14% certainty what move they're going to make next. I don't get worked up too terribly easily, but knowing I was a hostage in my own home with at least one virtually unkillable man roaming around outside was enough to make my butt clench. I was creeping around, turning most of the lights off so I could move around. Not many were on to begin with, so it wasn't drastic. But the house is mostly windows. But I knew what I had to do if worst came to worst. The shotgun was loaded, sitting in the hall closet. I knew my dad was driving like a bat out of hell to get home before Ray got to me. There wasn't cell phone service between the house and where my parents were in Oklahoma, so they had no way of checking on me. I went upstairs where there were less windows and prayed like I've never prayed before. Before I went upstairs, I forgot to get the shotgun, but there was no way I was potentially exposing myself to Ray to run back down and get it. I sat there and mentally kicked my butt about making that stupid mistake, because if he came in, I couldn't get the gun before he got me. I pondered for a little while about how I would have to kill him. You can't reason with someone on a bender like that, especially when they've been unexpectedly caught red-handed. I thought about the news headlines. What if he killed me first? What if I lived? Would I go to prison? My best friend shot a bear with a bow when it was barreling up the driveway towards her in 5th grade, and she was a hero. Would my news article read like hers did? The more I considered these things, the more a deranged sense of peace came over me. I would just have to kill them before they killed me. It was as simple as that. I was barely 5 feet tall, but dynamite comes in small packages. All I had to do was creep around to the closet to get the shotgun, or fend them off until I could get to it. Neither of these options were good, but I could do it. I knew I had a lot of fight in me and an outrageous temper. Go for the eyes, go for the groin. And if you get a hold of a hand, you can split it clean to the wrist if you pull it in the opposite directions between the middle and ring fingers. I peeked out the window in my sister's room and watched the events unfold. I discovered Ray had a friend, and he and this friend were starting up my dad's diesel. The garage was completely open and the tools were strewn out onto the concrete outside. They were moving around in the light with great urgency. I remembered time going by painfully slowly and quickly all at once. The truck drove off and my heart stopped. Were they coming up to the house? Were they stealing it? It drove off down the driveway and around the bend, never to be seen again as far as I knew. Sometime later they come back up the driveway on foot. Where they took the diesel I had no idea. Why they came back I also had no idea. I was losing my mind wondering where my parents were. It was pretty late at this point. Horrified, I watched as a Mercedes rolled out of the garage. The Mercedes was not in any condition to be driven on our washed-out and very long gravel driveway, and I knew they weren't going to baby her going down it. Some time goes by and I don't hear anything going on anymore. I assumed they drove off into the night in the Benz and it was all over. They had actually driven back to the guest house in the old feed truck that was parked by the barn a mile away, and I just hadn't heard it. I don't know how I didn't, but I guess my brain had just shut off to protect me. I sit against the wall and lay my head on my knees and pray that this is some insane dream caused by 9 Kit Kats and a heat stroke. Unbeknownst to me, my dad was driving up the driveway at that very moment, about to stumble upon a very wild time. At this point, Ray and his pal were ambling in the backyard, making their way to the main house. Since it had been hours since my call, Dad figured they'd just stolen some tools and gone on their merry way. He was driving down to the guest house to check on the losses, when he saw the 2 men in the backyard. He slammed the car in park, jumped out, aimed his pistol at them. The dialogue went like this. Ray: "Whoa, dude, easy with the gun." Dad: "What the hell are you doing here? What is all this?" It clicked with him then that this was Ray and his buddy. Ray chuckles nervously and puts his hand up and says, You weren't supposed to see this. We were getting it cleaned up before you got home." I don't remember what my dad said after that, and I don't remember how they got home, but my dad sure as hell didn't taxi them anywhere. The reason behind their spree was mostly meth-fueled. Ray didn't follow my dad's instructions, and got his truck stuck on a different route to the scrap metal. He walked over a mile in flip-flops back to the house to drive the diesel up there to pull out his truck, and got the diesel stuck too. We later found one of his flip-flops broken in the pasture. He walked about 2 miles total barefoot. The damage Ray and his friend did that night totaled up to about $2,000. They drove the tractor with the flat, damaging it beyond repair. They rifled around in my dad's diesel and put everything in total disarray, broke some electronics, and some tools were never recovered. They got sidetracked and paranoid and tried to cover it up by stealing things. The Mercedes thankfully wasn't dented by our sweet gals, the cows, and they gave it a good all-over licking. As for Ray, I still haven't met him yet. He's broken into my recently widowed granny's home on several occasions to ask her out on a date and to tell her the anvils behind her house are gonna get stolen. She turned him down, and then he stole the anvils. That night could have gone very differently. A 14-year-old girl was faced with the very strong possibility of making decisions no one of any age or gender should have to be faced with making. I think about how easily my life could have ended or been permanently altered. Why, it wasn't just a God thing, I guess. As they say, there aren't any atheists in a foxhole. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 3 True Scary Stories, episode 287. I just want to say a thank you to all the feedback you've been leaving on the videos recently. Nice stuff, it's very much appreciated. No, I will not be doing more singing, but your comments were very, very lovely, thank you. And I'd also like to encourage you to share the videos around if you could. We're at that point in the year again where things are starting to look a bit sketchy channel-wise. Views and everything else, you know, down. But we're kind of getting into the midpoint of the year, so hopefully it starts picking up. But every little helps, so if you just share them around, tweet them, all that good stuff. Every little helps. Even if it just happens to be one extra view, it is very much appreciated. Okay, and with that I think I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.